G'day everybody and welcome to the panel. We are on the road to Deadpool Wolverine, and today we have made our way to part 3 of X-Men 2. That's a lot of numbers. I'm suddenly really confused. My name is JASON BADOWER. I'm a comic book artist for DC Comics. I was thinking if I'd ever actually drawn Wolverine, and I did work on Logan. So there you go, there's bona fides. And I'm joined today by my buddy Marvel Living Library, Scott Stewart. How are you, mate?
I'm doing really well, mate. Last year was the 20th anniversary of this movie. I think we said that this year is the 25th anniversary of X-Men 1, or just about to be.
X-Men 1 is pretty much the 25th anniversary of Hugh Jackman's career. It absolutely put him on the map. Again, leading this feature, they have not slid him around to the back. I really feel like if any of the other castings that they'd have gone Wolverine, they might have actually had to relegate Wolverine to a smaller role, but he's still able to take center stage and able to absolutely rock it as Wolverine. So again, put on something like 20 pounds of muscle. You can absolutely see it. And it's so funny because I remember seeing X-Men 2 and being like, oh my God, he is massive compared to X1. And now my brain having seen where he gets to with Days of Future Past, it's, oh, he looks so little. He's so cute.
Compared to some of the physiques we've seen in superhero cinema in the intervening years, he now looks closer to Logan than he did at the time.
He really does. So what did you think?
I didn't think it was as strong as the first one. It does some things better and bigger. One thing it didn't do as well was tell a coherent, engaging narrative. Characters walk in and out of the story, and it's bloated in the middle, but hey, aren't we all? Even though it surpassed the original in some of the photography, the stunts, and the action, it really didn't quite live up to it in terms of a cohesive story you can go back to again and again.
Dude, I 100% agree. That's totally what I thought when I watched it again. I did find this way more fun, the next one. It was not as good a movie. I feel this would slot right into the upper mid-card of Marvel's work. It's nowhere near as incomprehensible as the plot of Civil War, but it doesn't have the emotional underpinning of Civil War either. So for me, that film cancels itself out with the set pieces bringing it into a net positive. Whereas this just has a very mediocre plot with some great set pieces and zero character work, apart from a couple pithy moments. But other than that, there's no real depth to it. I'm trying to think of the equivalent in the MCU.
The Avengers movies, because one of the problems with this movie is that there's too many characters in it. Too many cool characters. Not too many people, not too many roles, but too many cool characters that you don't get enough out of. Lady Deathstrike, for example. She could have had an awesome backstory or a redemption arc. Instead, she's just a sexy figure, and then out come the fingernails, then there's the fight, and then she's done.
She gets one line in this movie too. The equivalent Marvel film would be Ultron, where it is just stacked with too many characters. Nobody has any real arc or anything to actually do. This movie is absolutely Age of Ultron.
Yeah, that's definitely the right comp. It's a movie that gets worse the more you watch it. You can have a really good time the first time around, and there's so much going on and so much cool fan payoff that you can really enjoy that the whole way through and have a good time on the ride. But you go back and consider it as a piece of text with all that entails. Its weaknesses show up, and one of those weaknesses is way too many people.
I think that one of the things that really got itself over with us as fans was the amount of just more Easter eggs than they just got a room full of Easter bunnies to just go crazy inside that movie. Like, it is just so much name dropping and name checking and everything like that. And I think at the time, because we'd never seen anything like that, it was just mind-blowing thinking about, like, the whole movie was pregnant with ideas for this world building that could potentially occur, and just the infinite potential of that was so exciting. The fact that they knew the comics, even if they weren't doing the comics, they knew the comics, right? And they were like, we know it all, we're going to somehow corral it into this giant idea that you might hopefully really enjoy. And I think that was something that I was very much swept up in. But now, having seen Marvel do it 1,000 times better than was ever realized from that movie, that sort of just feels like an empty promise to me and doesn't have any weight or momentum or enjoyment for me.
A lot of it flashes past really quickly too, and you've got to really pause it and pay attention to get that level of engagement out of it. was in the transition between we're ashamed of the material, let's call that the Batman 89 era, and we really love the material. And we're in that transition. We've just had Spider-Man, which is at that point the most comics faithful serious adaptation we've ever had. And this is part of that transition, something that actually started under the we're actually ashamed of the source material era, becoming part of the hey, actually, if we double down on this, that actually works era. And then we got Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is if we do all of this, we will be beloved.
Next one you could recommend to non-comic book watchers and be like, go watch this. This is interesting. This is science fiction. As an actual film, X-Men 1 had a really cohesive character narrative. They explored the idea of why would Logan join this group of people, and creating the situations, the reasons for him to do that with the connection to Rogue, and then on as Magneto unveils his plot. Whereas this just seemed like we all need to band together to stop mutant intolerance and the excesses of it in an almost sort of domestic terrorism sort of way without actually examining any of the characters. There is no coherent character arc through the entire movie. I know Wolverine's the main guy, but I didn't feel he has an arc. No, and don't get me wrong, you don't have to have an arc to be a great film, but I do think it makes a good film better if it does have one. It's like this sort of little smaller Wolverine film where he has his little fight with Deathstrike, and it was beautiful, but that was not really the conclusion that this film needed. One of the strengths that we isolated of X-Men 1 is seeing them all together and really figuring out how they work as a team and as a dynamic. And I posed to you the idea that they are not used to working as field team, and to see them working multiple times to take down Magneto together. Storm will raise him up, like Jean stabilizes him, and Wolverine tries to land on the machine. Meanwhile, Cyclops is the backup plan. They constantly had all this teamwork, and one of the problems with this movie is they separated everybody. And I think that the team in X-Men 1 had a character arc also. You saw them evolve. Whereas in this, the team did not go in any direction that was vaguely interesting to me. We didn't get to see them being the X-Men, working together as a unit, not once. I don't think we ever saw Cyclops, Jean, Logan, and Storm all in the same room working together. And that is really disappointing when you look back on this film and just see this missed opportunity for their dynamics to go to another level, both superhero-wise and also personality-wise.
Yet again, substitute my part of the video for the mind blown. You're absolutely right. We never saw the X-Men being the X-Men. It was as much Magneto as anybody else that brings about the conclusion of the movie. They never came together. They never showed why the X-Men are the X-Men. It was, here's this world of mutants, and here's this semi-dysfunctional, almost Keystone police force analogy, if you like. But yeah, they weren't enough to get the job done. We never got to see the X-Men be the X-Men.
You never got that Avengers train station moment, or even that moment at the end of Voltron, just to see all of them in a room, dozens and dozens guys, soldiers just pouring it on them, and seeing them work as a team to protect each other, to take these guys down, to use each of their powers in tandem with each other would have been the moment. And then you had Deathstrike in there and whatever other mutants that he unleashes, and you just have this whole battle in the middle of it. Could you imagine that fight with Nightcrawler bamfing Wolverine around and dropping him on guys, and he dices guys? He picks up Scott, who takes out a bunch of guys and leaves him somewhere. Oh my God, it would have been the White House on steroids with them finally seeing them all together. I'm so sad now.
Oh, you mean paying off the opening in the climax would have been a good thing for the movie?
Crazy. Just crazy talk. There are times I realize I just put on my tin hat and I'm against the wall, just like looking like a crazy man, but it'd be nice.
I'm glad I'm sitting in an armchair while I'm doing all this quarterbacking.
Look, again, it's one of those things where it's not just to talk about what could have, should have been in the last movie, but to hopefully put these ideas out there. So if people who are listening to this stuff while they are contemplating creating new things can help them create cohesion, to look at their stories. The number of times that I listen to video essays and just been like, oh yes, I totally forgot to do that in my script. and they have helped me. If we can be of any assistance to anybody out there, man, it's way more than just looking back. It's looking back and helping people to look forward too. What did you think of the costumes?
I think they kept the aesthetic from the first one, but did take a little more comic book flair. The consistency of the black leather just really washes over me. The most dated part of the film for me, that black leather aesthetic, which we're probably about 5 years away from becoming retro and cool again. If you've still got your PVC pants from back in the late 90s, make sure they haven't been moth-eaten. They'll be cool again soon.
Unfortunately, I was reading this little tidbit, like Singer is unfortunately just in still full garbage human being mode. I don't know if you heard this, but The Independent, the newspaper, did an interview with Alan Cummings, and he said that at one point, him, Halle Berry, Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, James Marsden, and Famke Janssen all went into his trailer in full costume to do like an intervention, just talk to him about the painkillers that he's been taking, his temper tantrums, just disappearing for excessively long periods of time, leaving everybody around. Singer's response: "You people are all full of effing." This is while he's accused of sexual assault on a minor and continues to berate the cast over the course of the shoot to the point where Halle Berry like tells him to kiss her black ass and walks off.
As I said during our discussion on X-Men 1, it's a real shame he's a giant piece of shit because he was actually good at this stuff. So are a whole bunch of other people, and I don't miss him.
Yeah, it took Matthew Vaughn, I think, to finally bring the franchise back on track with a completely new reboot.
Talked very much about how disappointed we are with aspects of this film, but there are aspects of this film that are still like the best they've ever done it. And one of those is the opening, the Nightcrawler invading the White House scene. But my God, that scene stands up. That is amazing. It's thrilling. It's well shot, extremely well constructed. Bryan Singer gave us the feeling of Nightcrawler, and there's so much staging and CGI and precision in getting that sequence together. You can see where the money went on screen.
Look, this opening, one of the tropes of a Bond movie is always having that great opening that gets your heart pounding immediately and also sets your expectations. And I feel that the White House scene with Kurt, with Nightcrawler, absolutely does that. It is probably one of the best openings. It's right up there with the Auschwitz scene, but in a completely different way. For all of Singer's storytelling ability, one of the things that he very rarely shows is any sort of directorial flair. He's very good at telling a story in a very coherent way, making sure the character moments line up very well, say The Usual Suspects. He has very little directorial intent, though, when he comes into a scene in terms of bringing an extra level of flair, of visual ideas, until this White House scene. This was so carefully, wonderfully constructed. Apparently it was hell to shoot, and I'm sorry for everybody who suffered making that scene, but it is one of my all-time favorite comic book scenes ever. And I think one of the reasons why it succeeded so much is they said, this is Nightcrawler's ability set. How do we show that off in the most exciting way possible? And they goddamn nailed it in every way, shape, or form.
Absolutely nailed it. There's a George Lucas quote that I'm about to butcher, in which that all a movie really needs is a great first 5 minutes and a good last 20 minutes. And my God, is this film a good example of that?
Then we go to Wolverine, who's obviously on set somewhere that's supposed to be Alberta, Canada, seeing wolves and searching Alkali Lake and finding nothing, which is weird in retrospect, because isn't he supposed to have super senses? That's Wolverine's thing.
The use of Wolverine's super senses in this film is entirely consistent with what has been established in X-Men 1. And the best example of that, to jump ahead, is the Mystique seduction. He's immediately rebuffed because he can smell that it's Mystique. But she gets in, gets a kiss, gets to rub up all against him. Look, if Famke Janssen walked into my tent in a tank top, the blood would rush away from my nose. But I feel like Wolverine probably still would have picked that up. What bugs me about the scene at Alkali Lake is that it's this beautiful photography, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine walking through the forest, so the scale of him doesn't matter. It's one of the most, this is Wolverine from the comic scenes that we get. And he gets there, looks around, and then we cut away, and he's basically given up. He didn't look, but didn't think maybe that the surface wasn't where they conducted the adamantium experiments, didn't try any of the doors. Just, oh, okay, I guess it is deserted. Oh, back to the mansion.
The fact that he wouldn't find footprints, that he wouldn't search around, I call it the Smallville phenomena. John Glover, playing Lex's dad, would drive to Smallville from Metropolis, which is something like hours and hours of drive, to have a 2.5-minute conversation with Lex and then drive back. And it'd just be like, what? What? No, like it would have taken Wolverine a day, maybe more, to get up there, depending on how fast Cyclops' bike was, which he stole. The point is, you're not just going to get there and be like, oh, I don't see anything. Wolverine is a tracker. The idea that he wouldn't see something, smell something, notice something, it's ridiculous.
Camp there for a week and look.
He's got nothing going on in his life. What's in my day planner? Search Alkali Lake today. What's tomorrow's itinerary? Search Alkali Lake. What's the day after? Search Alkali Lake. Jesus, dude. And even then, the other thing, let's say the door's locked. I got 6 ways to get through those doors. What on earth are you doing? Is he really just going to stand there and just be like, oh, it's locked? Oh, let's just go home.
There's some ruins there in the snow. Right? Wolverine just has a fear of success, and at the first roadblock,
is that the character arc for the movie? The Wolverine needs to like learn to embrace success. It's like an Anthony Robbins seminar in 2 hours with a whole bunch of claws and superpowers. I totally missed it, man, but we figured it out.
No, there is one character arc in the movie, but we'll get to him.
All right, I love it. I'm curious to hear what it is. So then we get to the Smithsonian, and then we have little boy Artie, who in the comics is known as Leech. Indeed,
Artie
Halle Berry.
and Leech are 2 different kids.
Sorry,
Artie and Leech are 2 different kids.
Are they really? That's not Leech. No. That completely screws my theory. My headcanon was always that was Leech. And the reason why Jean had to leave the plane is because Leech was on board. And she makes a choice between saving the kids or herself and realizes she can't do it on the plane. And so that I had this whole reason for why Jean sacrificed herself that now makes 0 sense. There we go.
He's the reason Jean had to leave the plane. When you go to the gym and lift heavy things, do you stand on the dumbbells as you try to lift them up? Or do you stand on the ground and try and lift it up?
Speaking of actually interesting headcanon, though, when we're in the Smithsonian and Jean Grey is starting to freak out with her telepathy. She's starting to hear people. It's the idea that the Phoenix Force is starting to have some effect on her. What's really crazy is it's pointed out that she hears 3 voices in that time that are actually, one is from the past, one is a Secret Service agent who's trying to save the president, another is Rogue from the future during the X-Mansion attack, and another is Wolverine screaming no when Stryker attacks. And it's the idea that her telepathy is becoming unhinged through time. And there is an idea that when she scans Logan in the first film, we see him wake up in that. And it's the idea that she telepathically reached him back in time, creating one of the reasons why he's infatuated with her today. So
that's awesome. If only there was some way the audience could know that by watching the movie. That's really sweet. And I love the production choices. That's the sort of actually stuff that really annoys me about this sort of stuff, because there's no way you can pick that up just watching the scene. You might, on the third watching, notice this line and this line are the same and then go down a rabbit hole. But that's just mean in a way.
That's the sort of creative over masturbation that is only appropriate in a forum like this. This is where we discover absolutely inane things that creators might or might not have actually planned that enrich future viewings and allow you to, at parties, to go, actually.
The well, actually of it is very annoying, but like the detailed headcanon making sense of other things is what we as fans do.
Then we get to the food court. We meet our new Pyro. We see Rogue and Iceman, and everything is just, I know this is 2003, but the makeup and hair is just killing me. I think Rogue is the only one that looks normal. X-Men 1 aged less visually in terms of hair and makeup choices than X2. One of the crazy things I heard is that after X-Men 1, they auctioned off a whole bunch of stuff, and they auctioned off Professor X's chair and apparently went to some lawyer And then they realized they needed the chair back. And so the lawyer, who apparently works in Patrick Stewart's lawyer's firm, rented it back to them for a substantial amount of money.
That's where at least part of that $50 million budget upgrade went. I think
apparently-
this scene is really important, though, because it does contain the introduction of one character who does have a character arc in this movie. Has a 3-act structure, perfect character arc. Unfortunately, it's one of the villains. Pyro is here as part of the class attending the museum exhibits. He's a student of Xavier who will, spoiler alert, end up leaving with Magneto and Mystique at the end of the film to join the Brotherhood of quote-unquote evil mutants. He feels the allure of Magneto at their first meeting, but pulls back because of societal expectations. It's an inverted arc. It's not a hero's arc, but it's a character arc.
I think there's one more character arc, but I'll get to that one later. So then we go back to the X-Mansion. Everyone's trying to find the assassin, but it's moving around. We don't know why. Everybody gets way more dialogue. Especially the women get way more dialogue in this film, which good for them. I just wish it didn't come with Cyclops. Poor Cyclops. But hey, justice for Scott. Poor Cyclops got totally hawk-eyed in this movie.
I was going to make the joke that you could compare him to a character from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, so not appearing in this film.
We were talking last week about how good Cyclops was, James Marsden was in X-Men 1. For him to just be sidelined, I guess because Halle Berry won an Academy Award for some reason. I've still not seen The Monsters Ball. And I guess she pretty much got all his lines. And
my understanding of the origin of the story is that Fox tasked 2 different writing teams, one writing team and David Hayter, whose work we so admired from the first film, to write a sequel script, and then handed both scripts to a second writing team to bash them together into a single story. And boy, does it come off like that.
It really does. It was David Hayter and presidential aide Zach Penn, actually. He quit Hollywood to work in Obama's, God, what do you call it? I wanted to say regime, but that's what Trump wants.
Administration, I believe.
Thank you very much. And then it came to Michael Dougherty and Dan Harrison, who apparently did like T7 drafts. They just ran through so many different ideas. They built Sentinels. They realized it was too expensive to animate them. Halle Berry wins her Academy Award, and so they decide to actually write her more into the movie. Which I think it was not one of its strengths.
She seemed even more checked out than she did in X-Men 1. She didn't bother doing the accent, just totally dropped that. All the eye effects are CGI this time, no contacts. And I don't know who she's playing, but she's not playing Storm.
I 100% agree. The fury and intensity of especially a young Storm, who's just come off the streets of Egypt as a thief and pickpocket, brought up in the school of hard knocks and just knocked everybody else down around her, worshipped as a goddess, and then eventually finding herself in the X-Men and then rising to the level of teacher. There is none of that. And it is just some lady swanning in and out of scenes, giving the bare minimum effort in every scene. I was so disappointed every time Storm was on screen.
Compared to the committed performances, Stryker, Magneto especially, bit night and day.
And even going back to how we got onto this topic of Cyclops, he has one scene, really, and that is when Jean goes out to sacrifice herself at the end, and he is distraught. Like, you really feel that is a guy who is ready to blow a hole in the ship to go get his wife. And he brings so much in such a short period of time, and yet is absolutely shortchanged because he doesn't have the award under his belt. Cyclops deserved much better. And this is not like a Jeremy Renner situation where the guy can't bring it. This is James Marsden, who can bring it. And then we go back to the White House. Then we have Stryker, who's no longer Danny Huston, Brian Cox. I'm going to say Huston, Houston, who knows?
Have you heard of the actress Angelica Houston?
Yes. Is it the same spelling?
It is the same spell.
Then Danny Houston it is. I'll pay that.
Unless somebody wants to tell me differently, I'm going to go and insist that it's Danny Houston.
I will stand corrected unless the man himself issues some sort of statement.
We're not journalists. We're just idiots.
Drunken idiots. Now, he was based on Reverend William Stryker from God Loves Man Kills, Professor Andre Thornton, the creator of the Weapon X program, and Henry Peter Gyrich, who was the government liaison, like a government official dedicated to destroying the mutant populace, who was also the Avengers government liaison. Just all three characters rolled up into one. I just feel like Brian Cox, again, just crushes this movie. Just does such a great job. We see Bruce Davison back as Senator Kelly, not Kelly because it's actually Mystique. We see Lady Deathstrike, Kelly Hu, who I always remembered from Martial Law with Sammo Hung, who gets one line in this movie, who, yes, she's a good-looking woman, but she can do a lot more than just be eye candy. I thought she brought great presence to the... And I love the ideas of just her constantly cracking her fingers, which I know is one of those things that most people be like, why is she doing that? But as a comic book fan, that's one of those small things that really ushered me along when I was first watching this film, when it came out. Being like, oh my God, that's Deathstrike. That's Deathstrike. That's so cool.
We took issue with how Wolverine's claws actually work in the context of wrists. So it only seems reasonable to take some issue with how Lady Deathstrike's adamantium spikes interact with not just operating door handles and forks, but her wrists as well.
So this is crazy. So this is something that the filmmakers actually came up with. They're all in here. And they might be lower, but they, if you zoom in on them really closely, they are collapsible segments that, what's holding them all together? I don't know, maybe just adamantium leaning on adamantium. But what gets me is she had to grow her nails out because they would glue them to the bottom of her nails. And could you imagine not wanting to swing those things? Because if they got caught on something, you'd rip your nail right off. Like, Jesus Christ. Could you just not put fake fingertips on her, people? That's awful.
Oh, yeah, that's terrible. And it makes me regret every piece of advocacy I have done during our chats on the need for practical effects wherever possible, because as bad as those Wolverine Origins claws were, ow.
So then we go back to the X-Mansion, part 2. We see Rogue and Iceman and trying to make out. I get the impression that Rogue can control it a little bit better. People don't instantly start dying as soon as they make some sort of contact with her. I've got Colossus drawing, and again, fan service. I was just so excited to see Colossus. And yeah, Storm and Jean Grey heading off to Boston instead of poor Scott. So he's got taken off the away team, replaced by Jean. After taking down the train station, Professor Xavier is just, you're benched, Scott.
Link harder, son. I hope James Marsden got paid well for this.
I feel like he was just like an extra in the background. It was heartbreaking. So then we go back to Magneto's prison and we see all the stuff that's going on with the guard, the interrogation with Stryker, dripping some sort of liquid onto the back of his neck as he asks him for more intel. So in the comics, Jason Wingard is one of the heads of the Hellfire Club. Also, one of its heads is Emma Frost and Sebastian Shaw, who we see in X-Men First Class. And this is a significant...
who there's a reference to in this movie.
I think it's when we have the Hank McCoy cameo. I think he's debating Dr. Shaw.
Yes.
Jason Wingard is a top-level telepathic mutant power. He's not Omega level, but he is very powerful. And to take that character, put him into completely different circumstances, almost like some sort of Elseworld tale, where he gets to keep his powers and nothing else about him is kept, is sort of fine in that he was always like a C-list character that didn't really have a great identifiable role in the X-Men canon. So to elevate him sideways and upwards works, but it's strange. I was really quite surprised they didn't go with, say, Legion as more of a usable character.
Assumed it was Legion due to the diachromatic eyes. When I first saw it, it wasn't until later that I actually encountered the Mastermind character in a meaningful way and realized that was the power set.
I thought it was Legion too, till it is apparently Mastermind. It was just like, okay, I've worked on Legion, the FX series, but I never actually watched it. But I've heard it's pretty good.
I watched and loved the first season and half watched the second season and still have the third season to go back to.
What's interesting too is that I saw other people completely misinterpret the problem with Stryker's son. And I got the impression that Stryker sent his son to Xavier to be cured of being a mutant. And when Xavier couldn't cure him and was probably just like, hey, it's a natural condition, it's fine, Stryker pulled him out and then everything went to hell. I saw other people implying other things, that He wanted Xavier to do other things, like train him. Is that the impression you got? That Xavier was supposed to cure him?
There've been a couple of characters. Legion, we mentioned earlier, the son of Moira McTaggart, Proteus, who've had this role of the failed student. And because they're smearing it all with Mastermind's powers and Legion's diachromatism, it's hard to really pass out. In the film, what we get is that, Stryker didn't understand what Xavier was offering. And when his teachings failed, leading to the death of Stryker's wife and Jason's mother, that was the inciting incident and the removal from the school and the imprisonment, surgery, and torture.
I always felt that one of the things that the film had most going for it that is still really enjoyable for me to go back and watch it for is as a gay allegory. And I very much felt that Stryker had sent his son to Xavier hoping that he could pray the gay away. And when he said, that's not what I do, we accept people and uplift them and try and get them to accept themselves and live happier, more harmonious lives with society, that Stryker was not happy with that and pulled him out. And then that's when all things went to hell. That's the metaphorical relationship. It's funny because this film does actually work very well as metaphor, but not so much in terms of character for me. Does that make sense?
It does. It's interesting that you bring up the pray the gay away analogy, because the William Stryker in the comics isn't an army dude. Had nothing to do with the Weapon X program. He was a religious evangelist who was convinced that mutants were an abomination against God, and that is the story backbone and the rough Stryker role, without the tie into the Weapon X thing, that we get from God Loves, Man Kills, the graphic novel that, they've said parts of this were based on. I'm wondering if your reading is coloured by that perspective. I don't remember the specific timeline of events that the movie's established. Whether the son was at the school, then there was the incident where the mother died. But regardless, Stryker did not get what he wanted out of whatever the Xavier Institute cost him.
I got the impression that he sent his son to the Xavier. Xavier was like, I'm not going to pray the gay away, pulls him out, pretty much forces his kid to try not to be a mutant. And in retaliation, Jason starts torturing his parents through giving them visions and forces his mum to kill himself. And that's when Stryker initiates the torture and the lobotomies and the spinal fluid harvesting, as you do.
Yep.
That's absolutely the one thing that they brought to the movie. The sort of coming up with that idea, I think, is actually quite resourceful and interesting, being able to use that idea that his mutant power, some sort of biological basis rather than just some sort of like a cerebral thing.
You're right with the detail that Jason caused with the mother's death, which gives him a villainous agency that he doesn't seem to have throughout what we see on the screen.
It does work really well. We cut back to Cerebro. They do a lot of work establishing how Cerebro works from the opening credits and stuff like that. They establish Wolverine's healing factor. They find the assassin mutant. Wolverine wants more telepathy to find more of his memories. Xavier will not do it. Do you say Xavier or Xavier?
I say Xavier.
Yeah.
But we grew up in Melbourne, which has a well-known school called Xavier College, whereas I think everyone in America pronounces it Xavier, including Stan Lee.
We should defer to that. But the other thing that makes Melbourne way cooler than anybody else is the guy who founded it. Its real name is John Batman.
It's not pronounced that way, but yes.
No.
The guy who founded Melbourne is Batman.
It's Batman, isn't it? Yeah. So close. Dude, you were this close to being really cool.
When you read that as a kid, you get
very excited until someone pops that bubble for you. We have Storm and Jean on the X-Jet, and they're heading to Boston. What are the things about this? To get from upper New York to Boston in that jet would take you maybe 20-something minutes, despite the fact that Jean and Storm are out of this movie for way longer than that. But we'll get to that. Then we have the Mystique infiltration, and we just get a shotgun of Easter eggs in this thing. Look, there's just so much stuff. There's Omega Red, the Muir Islands. Franklin Richards is in there. That's the one I remember blowing my mind. Reed Richards' son. Then we go back to the Boston church and Storm and Jean confront Nightcrawler, and Alan Cummings actually speaks fluent German, which is one of the ways that he got the role. In the comics, he's also Mystique's son, if I remember correctly. I think things are a little changed in this continuity.
I don't remember what the current status is, but at one point, he was the son of Mystique and a character called Azazel, who those who've seen X-Men First Class will know is the demon-looking dude with the teleportation powers. I don't remember when the comic X-Men First Class came out, but I want to say that's when they introduced that idea that it was Mystique and Azazel were the parents of Nightcrawler.
Then we see the neck mark, and we immediately know that Stryker is behind the plot against the president, which is interesting when you put the audience ahead of the people in the movie. Logan is back at the X-Mansion, wakes up, he's dreaming of his adamantium procedure, and we see so much more, and it's so much more macabre than the actual PG thing that we got in Wolverine Origins, actually. He wakes up, he sees channel-changing kid and Bobby Drake. Xavier visits Magneto, and Scott accompanies him. There's a really interesting idea that why is Professor X taking in Wolverine? Is he leading him on because he needs this asset, or is he actually genuinely trying to help him? I think it's a really interesting idea. Magneto confesses that he told Stryker about the mansion. Professor X is gassed, and Scott has his last scene in the movie for a very long time and gets his butt handed to him by Lady Deathstrike. Gets taken down ridiculously easily, offensively easily. Justice for Scott.
Justice for Scott. Although, look, in fairness, if Scott didn't have concussive blasts that he could produce from his eyes, Lady Deathstrike would dismiss him fairly easily. And he had a lot of reason in a prison suspended in a hole beneath the earth not to randomly blast. It makes sense to me that he would hold back and therefore be decimated.
I think it could have been done better if Deathstrike fought with her back to Magneto and the Professor. But then again, Scott has such accuracy. One of the things in the comics is that we see Captain America is just so good at bouncing his shield off things and ricocheting in the comics, way better in the comics than he is in the movies. And Cyclops is another level beyond Captain America. He can ricochet things off 12, 15 different surfaces and still make a beam hit exactly where it's supposed to be, which makes him also a killer pool player. So don't play Cyclops in pool.
It also doesn't make sense because when he wants to blow through a wall, he'll blow through a wall. And when he needs it to bounce off at a perfect 90-degree angle to set up his complicated bank shot, it'll bounce off at a perfect 90-degree angle to set up his complicated bounce shot. It looks cool in the comics, and you don't always think about it, but the powers are inconsistent. If it's this other dimensional force that he can only control by not unleashing it or unleashing it, he's not taming it or shaping it in any way. Unless he has adamantium strategically placed around the mansion that he can blast off. There's no reason it should ever be able to do that.
So then we got the kitchen chat, and Wolverine is looking pretty good, 20 pounds better good, and still looking tiny by Wolverine Days of Future Past. They're talking about Rogue, they're talking about Dr. Gray and their relationships, and the X-Mansion attack. What do you think of that? How did that hold up?
That held up really well. It was tense, but it wasn't a horror film, so younger audiences could enjoy it and be tense by it. It was thrilling. It was largely practically done. That was a 3,500-pound wall of ice that they put in the middle of the hallway and then blew up.
That is ridiculous.
It was insane. And it had secret walls, which you always want those huge mansions to have. It looked like a lived-in space, a place a whole bunch of different people have their own rooms in and common spaces. The only thing that really didn't make sense for me is that they kept their soft drink in the cupboard. Sometimes Bobby wasn't going to be there. And how sick of doing that must he be if that's where they keep their Coke? They had a big fridge. It didn't look overly full. Why is it in the cupboard?
I remember the first time finally seeing Wolverine do his Berserker Rage and just absolutely having total ecstasy over that. And still there's a part of me that can still really enjoy it for that. It's fan service, but it's just in the absolute best way. It's probably one of the best Berserker Rages that I've seen up until Logan. And now, mind you, I have not seen the Wolverine, so we will see how that goes. But I've seen everything else, and I still think this holds up as one of the best Wolverine set pieces on screen.
It was definitely conceived of and delivered on, giving that Berserker Rage moment to the Wolverine fans. There was and remains a fair criticism that it didn't deliver on that. And there is apparently a longer cut of it, which is a bit more Berserker and therefore a bit less PG-13. But I'm not one to get stuck on, oh, it didn't be as bloody and mean as I wanted it to be. thing, we got to see it. We got to see the physics of it. We got to see it in motion. And here in 2024, we've been getting it for a long time now. We've gotten almost everything. But at this time, getting that was a revelatory moment.
Yeah, I did not need to see sprays of blood everywhere. That would have absolutely shifted the tone of the movie for me. Logan's stats for the movie were pretty good. He took out 10 guys and only 6 kids got captured. I think that's pretty good numbers out of for what he did. I also thought that was a reasonable level of success and failure that I think was absolutely believable for the situation. Really enjoyed it. They gave him $50 million more to do this film. Ballooned upwards of 125 from a very fair $75 million. And I think it made over $400 million, did really well. What gets me? So they got 125 million. And what did we get? About 4.8 seconds of Colossus in that movie. The way that you could see the fibers in his skin, like it wasn't just metal sheen over the top. This just shows you how far technology come. Deadpool, how many X-Men years later, X pun intended, 8 million, the budget for that movie. And we got Colossus in that entire goddamn movie. Like, that is just head-bending to me. And to go from a couple seconds, like how expensive certain things were back then. Quick PSA that there's one of these deep dives coming each week. Please consider subscribing and the algorithm gods will let you know when the next one is up. And if you consider popping your claws on that like button, that'd mean the world to us. And maybe you'll help this video get to another Wolverine fan so that they can join the chat too. Or maybe just send it to a Wolverine fan that you know, right? I also really love that they jack Cyclops' car and we find out that Cyclops listens to NSYNC really loud when nobody else is around. Or maybe Gene borrowed his car, who knows?
As much as I want justice for Scott, I am not at all surprised he listened to NSYNC. Not he slightly.
You take that back, you dirty scoundrel. Take that back. Scott does not listen to NSYNC.
Scott listens to NSYNC.
All right. So
Scott's lucky his Spice Girls CD was on track too.
Scott's lucky that Bryan Singer wasn't friends with one of the members of the Spice Girls. That's why we got NSYNC. Stryker raids the mansion, gets the parts that he needs for Cerebro. We go to the bar and we see the drunken orderly from Magneto's prison working there. We see Dr. Hank McCoy on the TV and the Sebastian Shaw reference that you mentioned. The newscaster is played by David Kaye, the voice of Professor X in the cartoon X-Men Evolution. I should have mentioned too that in the White House at the start, the lady who gives the quote from Lincoln plays Jubilee in X-Men Evolutions. And we finally get to see Rebecca Romijn. Which would be interesting too, because if you didn't know who was actually in the movie, you might not actually know who she is, even though she's wearing a blue scaled dress. She seduces him, drugs him, and injects him with liquid metal, and probably worth it.
He wore tidy whities and Velcro pants. Even though there was a part of him going, she's going to kill me, she's going to rob me, she's going to use me to free this war criminal from the prison I work at. There was just this part of him going, if this is the best I get, I'm going to take it. Damn the consequences.
I can understand. That's some deep character writing there.
I've never been so angry at makeup artists spending so long covering up that woman in every other scene in the movie, even though it's obviously great that work that they did.
It's so interesting too, because normally in most of these sorts of movies, like the Hulk, they would use the Hulk very sparingly, but she's just Mystique all the time. And obviously we get that line where Nightcrawler says to her, you can look like anybody. Why don't you look like to fit in? Just we shouldn't have to. And it's a great philosophy that sort of explains why she's always Mystique and why she always goes back to being like that too. We've even seen when we go back to the new Mystique movies, she's Jennifer Lawrence the majority of the time. She does not look like Mystique. To your point, when you have Rebecca Romijn, I'm sorry, the special effects are really impressive. She brings value to the screen all by herself.
Continues to be a stunning beauty and continues to be a really good actress. I'm a big fan of her work in Star Trek Strange New Worlds.
Stryker confronts an imprisoned Xavier who's wearing his neural inhibitor. He inflicts his son on him, and we get all that backstory that we covered earlier. We see the Deathstrike 2 is being controlled. Xavier figures out that Stryker attacked the president all by himself and figures out that Stryker wants to find all the mutants and that he's using the spinal fluid to control everybody. We then cut to Bobby's parents' house, and we have Wolverine still trying to figure out Cyclops' cell phone. Bobby and Rogue kiss, and it does not go well. Wolverine possibly kills a cat. Doesn't kill the cat's fine, but there's some weird audio choices in that
kills the
sequence. Yeah. You think it's
kills
another
the
cat. But the cat comes and licks the frozen tea. So I think despite the ending of the movie, the Magneto escape for me is the third big set piece. From the White House, the mansion attack, Magneto's escape is just absolutely awesome as far as I'm concerned. Still resonate for you?
It's a very dramatic moment. It's a very campy and superhero comic book moment, which is what I love about it. The complicated plan to get the one thing he needs. It does raise a few questions, though. How far do Magneto's powers extend? Because there's a functioning elevator just outside of the range where everything is plastic.
And how do they figure that out to know his range? I don't even want to talk about where he's ripping up stadiums and stuff like that. But even in this movie where he stops the jet, even the jet, as it's falling, is caught how many 100 feet in the air? That is way out of the range of that prisons.
Surely there was enough metal in the computers and the body scanner and the elevator and the Rio bar in the concrete that held this thing together that he could have built the little platforms to tear the whole thing apart and walk out. Surely anytime 3 human beings came into his cell, he could have extracted enough iron out of them to get something done. But the spinal stuff gives you enough in-universe reason to at least dull his powers enough of the time between doses.
And at the end of X-Men 1, he could have still not have recovered from giving his powers to Rogue. And then they quickly got him onto the spinal fluid. There's enough wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff that we can hand-wave him that one through. But solid questions, though.
Questions that you ask yourself if you think about it for 5 minutes. And the trick of cinema is that you don't get to think about it for 5 minutes. You get to think about it while it's on screen, and then there's a whole new wave of audiovisual information slamming you in the face and ears. And so you can get away with all these sorts of things.
So Magneto escapes, and it's awesome. Then we have Bobby's confession where he comes out of the closet to his parents, which is interesting because in the comics, Bobby is actually gay. He's an Omega level mutant who is also gay and one of the original X-Men.
Asterisk. He didn't come out as gay until 2015.
Yes.
And it was an alternate universe version or brought forward in time who went through this experience and figured himself out and came out. Meanwhile, the adult grown-up Bobby Drake still exists in the universe as a canonically heterosexual dude. So I guess props for making an original X-Men gay, but it was over 50 years after he was created and first published and appeared in thousands of books. And they left some wiggle room where he's still hetero if you need him to be.
Oh my God, comics people. For me, is an Easter egg. His mum, Jill Teed, the actress, is Sergeant Hadrian, the witch trial hunter from Battlestar Galactica. So I was quite happy to see her again. And then his younger brother decides that he doesn't like his brother being gay, and so decides to call the cops on him. As you do.
Biggest villain in the film. Look, at least William Stryker went through horrible mental torture that led to his wife's suicide. This dude is just jealous of the attention and fancy school his brother gets to go to.
So we cut back to Storm and Jean, who've finally gotten back on the plane and heading back to go see everybody else. And they're heading to, and they're chatting to Nightcrawler, who's been living at his circus. And we get that whole thing with Storm about the whole faith versus anger thing. We get to Bobby's house, and we have that cool sequence where Pyro decides to go crazy on all the cops that decide to arrest them. Wolverine gets shot in the head and gets knocked out for the majority of it. Rogue uses her powers to suck the powers out of Pyro and put out all the fire. Note, I was quite surprised at how loose Wolverine's shirt was. Really could have been tighter. Just very disappointed. Out of canon.
Look, in canon, I'm surprised he had a shirt on. Unless
true.
Scott makes him put on the black leather onesie. He's shirtless as much as he can be.
Wolverine is a dick to Nightcrawler. And then we come back to Professor X and Jason. Professor X is being worn down by visions and is tricked into using a fake Cerebro. Wasn't it in one of those Ocean's 11 movies where they couldn't break into the vault? So they build a fake vault that they then use the mark to break into. So one of those Ocean's 11 movies ripped off X2. So then the X-Jet has the fight with two fighters. They're going to do a dogfight, and now they seem to remember the Wolverine hates flying. We see Jean using the Phoenix Force despite having never been in space. Don't know how she got it. The Jets hit, Rogue gets sucked out, rescued by Nightcrawler, which is awesome. And they're rescued by Magneto, who happens to be wandering around nearby with Mystique. That's probably the weakest moment of the film. Yes, Magneto could have found them. Yes, Mystique could have found them, but it just crunches two completely disparate elements together in a very awkward way for me. After the rescue, they start planning their attack. They're all sitting around the fire. We discovered that they're back at Alkali Lake. That Wolverine totally failed his perception roll to find the secret bunker underneath.
Which, given the timeline of the film, would have been inhabited by prisoners, scientists, power, sense of people coming and going, trails of people coming and going. Hey, he missed it. The world's greatest tracker and hunter missed it.
I'm reading a Jason Aaron Wolverine story at the moment, and he's tracking Mystique. She can turn into anyone. She's in the Iraqi desert, she's in the Afghan hills, she's in tiny villages, she's anywhere. And the whole conceit of it is that he never has problem finding her, and he just turns up because he's just the greatest tracker on the planet. And the conceit is not that he can find her. The conceit is, how does he get to her every time? Because she's laid these defenses in front of her every time. Logan can find you. If he wants to find you, he will goddamn find you. Logan is somehow still smoking cigars. I don't know where he got them from. Maybe he stashes them in the jet.
I guarantee you smokers know to pack cigarettes or cigars wherever they're going.
It's like
smoking isn't cool, kids.
It's like the anti-Tony Stark, where Robert Downey Jr. would just stash snacks around the Avengers set everywhere and just be constantly eating them. But instead of blood sugar, it's nicotine levels.
We all feed our addictions in one way or another.
We all do. So Logan kisses Jean, who remembers that she's married to Scott, and decides to buff him. And while Logan's healing factor is kicking in, trying to cure his terrible case of blue balls, Jean Grey visits him, but we find out that it's actually Mystique. And I'm actually wondering if Mystique was sent there by Magneto to honeypot him and bring him over. I don't think it's a personal thing, because she seems way not offended when she's kicked out. What do you think?
She seems to not offended because, she knows she was trying to trick him. I always read both their interactions in the first and second films as a genuine interest from Mystique. Maybe it was suggested, man, you can't honeypot Wolverine. Except the entire plot of Wolverine Origins, the entire plot of... Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right.
Wolverine's character brought down by crappy writing. For every X-Mansion assault, there's stay in a log cabin with a woman lying to you every day.
Pretty much every relationship the dude ever had in comics turned into a supervillain whose primary motivation was to hunt and kill him. So eventually you've got to say, is it you?
On the jet, Mystique and Magneto mocking Rogue's new haircut from X-Men 1. Pyro chums up with Magneto and Mystique, moving into your character arc. What's your real name? You're a god among insects. And one of the things you were talking about, the Magneto Escape being so superhero-y, it's just who Magneto is. He loves to perform. He loves to be over the top and flowery about everything that he does. So for me, while it is absolutely supervillainy, it really feeds into who Magneto is and just his desire for not just vengeance, but just delicious vengeance at any point that he can get it. And
I hesitate to call it camp, but it definitely borrows on the camp traditions of, say, Batman 66. And in the sense that it's leaning into the material and the theatricality of it. And yes, Sir Ian McKellen, slightly good at theatricality.
Then we get back to Alkali Lake, and we see where the cool lighting from all the flashbacks has come from, which is awesome. Another thing that made me really disappointed about Wolverine Origins, and I would never go back to check it, but I really did not feel that Danny Huston was channeling Brian Cox in any way, shape, or form. I watched things like Lupo and Joseph Gordon-Levitt doing just a hard Bruce Willis impersonation, but I feel like Brian Cox is a very distinctive way of speaking and doing things that I just feel like Danny Huston just didn't do at all. Am I wrong there?
No, I don't think you're wrong. I don't mark Danny Huston's performance down, which I wouldn't have called a fail. He was believable and compelling enough in the role that was written. It's a hard thing to emulate somebody else's performance. Unless he could have found a way to find that same voice and that same intonation naturally, I think the better choice is to just play the character as emotionally true rather than literally true. And if you ask me, a lot of fans will say the weaknesses of the X-Men films as they go on is that they don't pay enough attention to their own chronology and history. Sometimes that's a strength. I don't think Wolverine Origins is improved by Danny Huston doing a Brian Cox impression.
We also get Stryker back in X-Men Days of Future Past when Mystique finds him in Vietnam. It's all very confusing too.
Yeah, and a completely different dude who, again, does a completely different performance. Closer to Houston than Cox. But look, if they recast Captain America, you can't just do Chris Evans, because you're not Chris Evans. There is a weird alchemy that actors, let's not say actors, that movie stars bring to performances. Robert Downey Jr. is a perfect example. There aren't a lot of times he turns up to a role and you don't see Robert Downey Jr. in it.
Which is, again, why he's so incredible in Oppenheimer. I don't know if you've seen that yet. You don't.
I haven't seen that.
It's really good. And he won Best Supporting Actor for that. And he's just gone. You barely see him at all in that role.
Was it Nightcrawler or Spotlight that he was in with Jake Gyllenhaal? It was the reporter working at the newspaper that...
you're thinking of Zodiac. Yes. He's excellent in that too.
Yeah, there's a subdued Robert Downey performance and a naturalistic Robert Downey Jr. performance. Dude, he's a good actor. I'm not saying he's not, but it's very hard to get past the Robert Downey Jr. of it all. Like, a bad example of it is Ryan Reynolds. Especially these days, you never get past the Ryan Reynolds of it all to get to a character underneath. But
I think, though, that when you are inheriting another actor's role within continuity, it is your job to bring something of that other actor to that role, to acknowledge that performance. I'm not even talking as a polite thing. I'm talking as a storytelling device for the audience.
Whether you want that, I think, is a stylistic decision. I disagree with that it is inherently the actor's job. Because it's a separate production, it's a separate performance. How many thousands of actors have portrayed Macbeth over the years? And no two of them have done it the same. And nor should they. You play the role you're given, not the role you've inherited. Yeah, it's not something that ever bothers me. In the context of the story they're telling, but it does change over a project like, say, the MCU, where you want a coherence of performance, but those are all largely by the same actors. There you go, actually. You can't say that in any way John Cheadle brought the same energy as Terrence Howard did.
No, but I'm also talking within continuity. You can see a connection between James McAvoy and Patrick Stewart. You can see a connection between Michael Fassbender and Sir Ian McKellen. Whereas I don't see any sort of connection between Danny Huston. I just think that when you're playing the same role in a flashback, there needs to be some sort of resonance.
Yes, in a flashback within the same production, the requirements are much more locked in. It wasn't the same production. It was a movie made the better part of a decade later.
See, I would argue that the only reason for Wolverine Origins is to fill in the gaps of continuity, because they desperately wanted to fill them in to tell a story that didn't need to be told. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to take Logan with the same actor that we recognize, and you're going to bring another character in who we also know and recognize, and for you not to do anything that really resonates for me in a meaningful way, even just things like for him to have glasses, this is, it's bigger than just Danny Huston. The whole directorial choice was, for your point, to play it emotionally on point rather than technically on point, which I think is actually a demand in something like...
Glasses and trouble reading is something that often comes with age. It's not necessarily a lifelong affliction.
I wear glasses, and I'm pretty sure I'm younger than Danny Huston for reading, and I'm pretty sure that I'm younger than Danny Huston at that point. I guess my point is that I just think that in this sort of... And this is again a thing, which I think the MCU has done a really good job of making us feel for these characters as they move through time. All right, Professor X has been taken over by Jason Wingard to start using Cerebro, setting in the ticking clock for the end of the movie. We get the infiltration where Mystique makes her way into the facility impersonating Logan. And credit where credit's due, I love that Stryker instantly looks at him and is just like, that's not Wolverine. And it's just kill it. And given that he has a file on Raven Darkholme, probably makes complete sense that he knows about shape changes too. Because Magneto probably would have told him all about her. This
Mystique doesn't know necessarily that Wolverine here and Stryker here means flying Wolverine with claws out. And that's not what this Wolverine is doing. So the fact that Stryker can walk up and this Wolverine isn't reacting is a pretty significant clue. It's not just my own work, which is a great line. But she was not behaving like Wolverine would. She looked exactly like him, was not Wolverine.
Apparently the Alkali base set was so large, it was in an old Sears warehouse, and they had to use bicycles just to get to the bathroom.
The climax of the film is narratively propulsive and fine in the moment. But again, it's one of those things, if you think about it for 5 minutes, what the f is going on? Why are they running for this helicopter that they think is out there? Because a bad guy said he brought one, instead of going to the supersonic jet that they know is about 100 yards away at most, that they have people there waiting to pilot out of the place for them.
Wasn't the spillway sealed off from the water?
The spillway, I think, is the justification for the change in plan. But once you get to the surface,
why would you not just circle round?
They're still running around the woods looking for a helicopter that may be there because the people they don't like and have fought against and have tried to kill them say it's there, or the jet that they know is there, protected by people who they know can look after it. Also has room for all of these people. I don't know if people know this, but the interior of helicopters, pretty small. Admittedly, this savage military operation designed to hunt mutants managed to kidnap 6 out of 70-odd students. 6 people plus the rescuers plus the evil mutants. That's a lot of people to squeeze into a helicopter.
If the soldiers were even a smidge more effective, they would have had no plan whatsoever. We can't all fit in this helicopter. If there were 20 or 30 kids there, they would have been SO. The mutants all get to Mystique. They all split up. Nightcrawler and Storm go get the kids. Magneto goes after Professor X, and Wolverine goes after Stryker. Meanwhile, Professor X is in the cheapo Cerebro. Normally, in most of these movies, they always come up with some sort of new piece of tech. Like in Xmen 1, they came up with the mutating device. I want to say mutantifying device again. But this, they used the technology from the first movie against them, which I really like. It was really tight. Jean and Cyclops have their lovers fight. It's the classic superhero misunderstanding fight. It just goes for 4 seconds. And they damage the dam doing so. Storm and Nightcrawler rescue the kids. Wolverine and Deathstrike. This really fun scene. We see the operation room. I love the lighting. I love the way it looked. I love the x-rays. We already see Deathstrike's operation on the wall, foreshadowing what's going to happen. I also Wolverine got more memories back in these 2 movies than 30 years of continuity at this point, so is that dissonance for me.
One of the problems with adapting comics is that comics are a cumulative medium. They're more akin to television, where it's episodic and things build. So you can call back to season 1 in season 4 and have it be this powerful moment for fans. But that's a hard thing to do in films where you get maybe 3 episodes most of the time. And then only if you're lucky. I think they were trying to build some of this in. And that soap opera part of the X-Men is something that they haven't brought to most adaptations. The original X-Men animated series is probably the best example, where different types of storytelling, different requirements of storytelling really affect how you tell the story and how effective a great story is. You can't condense Babylon 5's 5 seasons of complicated and evolving character arcs into a 90-minute movie and get the same result. And in the same way, you can't combine the 30 years at this point of Claremontian storytelling into 2.5 or even 4.5 hours and get those same levels of payoff.
And knowing that you're only going to have these very small opportunities to tell this story, why would you not tell these stories? No, I totally get it. So we have the Deathstrike fight, which, again, I think would have been, if there was a Kevin Feige at the helm here, it would have been Liv Schreiber in this role, and it would have just had so much more depth with him being mind controlled, and then having to kill his brother would have just been really interesting. Anyway, woulda, coulda, shoulda, if they'd actually had a plan. Magneto. I really love the grenades gimmick. One of the things in the movies is that he's so much cleverer, smarter than he is in the comics. In the comics, he would have just smushed everybody. He would have just crushed them. He would have just waved his hands. They would have just liquefied against the wall. Just the use of grenades, I think, is really fun. Professor X starts killing all mutants as Stryker flees. Magneto enters Cerebro and tells him to start killing humans instead, which apparently is an alternate ending. In the comic adaptation, they have it that Magneto just rescues him and takes him out. They wanted to keep the real ending secret.
Apparently the novelization has the same issue, where they didn't want the ending spoiled, because it's an all-timer that you remember forever. The official adaptations both end in two different ways than the actual movie does.
Oh my God. The secrecy of some studios is crazy. I just finished work on Wicked, the Cynthia Erivo, Ariana Grande movie. I was drawing the official artwork that goes on the action figures, right? Like you got the action figure and then you got the picture that goes behind them. They would not give me the costumes. They were like, can you just look at the trailer we released? I'm like, your trailer is in like 720p. I can't make out the textures. And then they come back at me with all these notes. I'm like, I need to know what the goddamn costumes looks like. Finally, they send me like her hat. And I can see that it has tiny ridges on it. I'm like, you mean I've just been drawing a black cone the entire time? It actually has texture on it. Ridiculous, the level of secrecy in some of these movies. I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to help. If I release this stuff, I don't get work again. Why would I sacrifice my entire career for your movie? I have hundreds of photos of the Justice League from all the movies, of Batman in his stealth costume before we even saw it in Justice League. I have Black Adam and everybody. This stuff is important. I keep it secret. It's inane, man. Absolutely inane.
I don't envy you.
It's one of those strikes you just can't afford as an artist in that industry. You just can't afford it. As I said, it's my entire career keeping these things under. For 15 minutes of fame, I'm trying to work for 50 years here, people doing this job. Like 15 minutes is nothing. And for what? What do you get paid for it? So you release someone's costume that everyone's going to see in a couple of weeks or months anyway? Like there's no point to it whatsoever. For me, I almost get angry that I get spoilers for everybody. I don't want the spoilers. That's the worst part about my job, not getting to see it on the big screen with everybody else. I know it sounds like such first world problems, but it really is. I don't get to really enjoy it.
I would goddamn hate that. I'm at the point where I don't watch trailers. I'm really not interested in engaging in the marketing. Because everything's based on a pre-existing IP, I already know pretty much whether I want to see it or not. So I don't engage with marketing, especially for things that I've already decided I'm going to see or am fairly sure I will see at some point. I leave that entirely out of my experience, and I get to enjoy the movie as the creators intend. Not have all the best moments ruined for me before I get to see it.
If I'm 50-50 about a movie, I'll watch maybe 30 seconds of the trailer and then just be like, okay, I'm good. I don't want spoilers.
If I'm unsure about a movie, I'm more likely to look up a review than I am go and watch the trailer.
So I'll tend to watch a minute or two of a review and I'll get the vibe and just be like, okay, this person whose opinion I respect, I'll go check it out. So everyone meets up and they're trying to stop Cerebro. Storm convinces Nightcrawler to teleport inside. This is where I think it's actually the other character arc in the movie, where Kurt realizes to trust and gives control and has faith in someone other than God, in the people around him, and to go in and teleport where he can't see.
You picked on my nomination for a character arc because it didn't have a clearly defined refusal of the call and visit with the goddess moment, for sake.
No, I'm sorry if I misrepresented that. This is my proposal for potential character arc for your consideration, not proper character arc, crappy
Definitely
character
not.
arc for your consideration. The closest the movie comes to character arcs is in two supporting characters.
The problem with Nightcrawler, if Toad was in the movie and we got the Nightcrawler Toad fight, we could assemble 3 acts for him. But after the amazing opening sequence and the conversation with Storm, he's like there to establish he's there so he can teleport people who are actually the focus of the climax, not be part of it himself. Look, my nomination of Pyro having a character arc, I think, is much stronger, but suffers from the same weaknesses as your nomination does. And I'm not going to argue. He does learn a lesson and behave differently than he would have at the start of the film. And if basically that's all I can hang my hat on for Pyro, we're basically on equal terms.
Dude, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I would say that the best movies are the ones that have two character arcs. It's why I love the original Star Wars: A New Hope, because you don't just have Luke's character arc, you have Han Solo's character arc too. And this movie is far lower down the totem pole of storytelling, with two sub-characters having arcs. I think they both have arcs. I just don't think they're particularly very good or well-explored arcs, because nobody else is even given an arc. But they're the closest I think that we can both come. It's interesting that we both came to the party with two completely separate characters.
I feel like you ragged on me when I suggested the Pyro arc.
No, I was like, oh, I think I have another one for us. I'm sorry if I gave you that. It was some sort of competition. There can only be one. The Highlander of crappy story arcs in X2.
We can both agree there isn't even one.
No. I think our two halves perhaps make a whole, like some sort of Voltron that's missing another leg and two halves, just limping along with a torso and a single leg.
It doesn't have the black lion. It's only got the red, blue, and yellow and green lions. You can build some limbs and leave some space for a torso, but without that black lion, it doesn't quite work.
See, I just saw it as the black lion and the yellow one, and it's just hopping along, just looking for... Got no arms, got no head, can't find my sword.
As a kid, I had 5 of the 6 Constructicons. And so I could almost build Devastator. But he couldn't stand up because I didn't have the other leg.
Oh, brutal. It's funny you mention that, because Devastator is where I started noping out of Transformers. When I realized I had to get more of them to start putting together to get something more, just got that FOMO part of me. Before I could convince my parents to spend $30 and I'd get Grimlock, an entire toy, just like the whole thing. And then having to I didn't see it as a value add proposition. I saw it as a value removal proposition with Devastator, because they weren't anywhere near as good as the original, as the other Transformers.
Isn't that the argument I was making with the MCU expansion into Disney Plus earlier? There was more of it, but you had to put it all together to make any sense of it.
Yes, 100%.
Because you had to do all of it, it became an obligation. It became a jumping off point.
Yes, you're right. You're constantly giving people reasons to say no. All right, coming back to X2, Nightcrawler completes his character arc and takes Storm inside, who decides to freeze Jason Wingard, Mastermind, Jason Stryker, Mastermind, and eventually who reveals himself. Nightcrawler teleports both Storm and Professor X, but leaves Mastermind in there for whatever reason. Wolverine finds Stryker, who's been chained up by Magneto, who went for the same helicopter, and just leaves him there. Rogue pilots the jet to rescue everybody. And then the vertical engines won't work, so Jean sneaks out, holds off the dam, and also raises the jet and sacrifices herself. We get some fantastic acting from James Marsden. And not for nothing too, Wolverine, but Cyclops totally beat him to the door. Cyclops was all over that situation, and Wolverine was just like, she said no, so I'm noping at.
I hated the cowardice of the ending, in a way, because multiple people make a decision to leave people to die. Multiple people we're expected to regard as heroes. And it's completely inconsistent with either the notion of superheroes, if you're going to go with that as your ideal, or the notion of realistic rage, you're going to go with that ideal. Wolverine was perfectly happy to murder dudes in armor doing their job, a job he used to have, by the way. But the dude who actually set out to with him and screw with everyone he knows and everything he ever knew, no, I'll just leave you there. And here at this school, allegedly, dedicated to improving the lives of mutants and understanding how we live together in harmony, just going, yeah, you're a bit awkward. We'll leave you to die in the crumbling cavern
I completely agree. One of my biggest problems, this trope happens all the time, and I first became aware of it when I was working on Arrow, and I'm still a huge fan of the first 3 seasons, actually. And really early on, when Oliver Queen comes back from the island and he just sees his bad guy in his dad's journal, and he kills his way to get to the guy. He gets to the guy, leaves him alive, because the guy's like, I didn't mean to, I was trying to do this. And you just killed like 20 security guards working for the guy. They got wives, kids, 401ks, and they're just here for a paycheck. And most of the guys that Wolverine killed were soldiers, American soldiers, special forces guys. And sometimes we actually see them having cavalry patches from specific divisions within the US Army. Wolverine kills them all. And you're right, the guy that is responsible for everything just leaves them alive. They do this so often. Oh, because we know him and he's a person, we need to keep him alive. But killing faceless dudes is fine. It's not fine. And the Kurt Wagner from the comics would never leave Jason Wingard there. He just wouldn't.
Kurt Wagner from this movie would never leave Jason Wingard there.
He would teleport in and go, it's too big. I can only teleport you. I can't teleport the machine. And then you have to leave me. And there would be a moment of pain, but he would try. Kurt would try. And we just end up, all our heroes falling into the Batman Ra's al Ghul thing, where it's, I don't have to save you. And it's then you killed him. You're responsible.
That's a choice. Inaction choice is an action. And yeah, you're not the good guy if you're choosing who lives and dies.
And that's the thing about being a hero. You're trying to save everybody. You are putting yourself in extraordinary danger to save people. That's what being a hero.
Who is more within their mandate than the poor, tortured son of a mutant hater who's a mutant whose power has ruined his life because he can't control it? That is the goddamn mandate of the Xavier Institute.
It really is. That's what the X-Men were made for, to find mutants that cannot control their powers, who are a danger to themselves and the people around them, and stop them and help them. It's pretty much what the X-Men do. And then their secondary thing is to stop threats to mutant kind and humanity like Magneto. They go out and they rescue mutants. It's their primary thing. You had one right there. Storm would never have left him either. Storm would have been like, Kurt, you got to go back. And he'd be like, of course.
Storm would have said, Kurt, you've got to, and Kurt would already have been gone, not needing to be convinced. You can do the moment of let him die with Logan. You can do the moment of let him die with Cyclops after he's just lost Jean. You can't do that with Kurt, ever.
Yeah, exactly. And again, even if Cyclops had his let him die moment, he'd be like, no, go get him. Go get him. Cyclops is a tactician, and he believes in Xavier's vision more than anybody else. And most importantly, is the plan for the vision every time. All right, the X-Men then manage to escape on the jet, and then they go freak out the president. And somehow both Bobby and Rogue have X costumes.
None of them are there whatsoever. And it's just a vision that Professor X gives the president in a split second. Because otherwise, the whole conceit of that scene falls apart. Even if everybody in that room is frozen like the dudes in the museum, who, by the way, were largely mimes. They're used to being still in a way that regular extras cannot replicate. It takes training to be that still. But yeah, so my read of that, it was just Professor X showing him the range of mutant power rather than all of the mutants exhibiting their powers in reality. Because there was a whole nation watch TV of the president sitting there going...
It's true. You're absolutely right. Because everybody else was like, Mr. President, Mr. President. Yeah, it's absolutely what happened. And then back at the X-Mansion, Wolverine makes a very bold shirt choice as they mourn Jean. And Wolverine admits that he lost out in the battle for Jean's heart, and Professor X starts class. And then we see the Phoenix in the lake, and it's all downhill from here until Matthew Vaughn takes over.
We didn't really get into it, but there was so little to the Jean-Wolverine relationship that it felt like one of those things that they thought they had to put in there, but had no idea how to develop. And I know we get the hints of it in the first one. Even having just watched that, it really comes out of nowhere how aggressive he is to a woman he knows he's in a relation. and Wolverine's a rough and tumble character, but the reason all the women fall for him is he always treats them with respect and affords them agency. And he doesn't contravene that here with Jean. He's still way more aggressive than I felt was justified from Jean's reaction.
Yeah, I felt that kiss was just way over the top. I just don't think Logan would do that. But it's a Hollywood movie, and to attractive people got a kiss at some point. And I just feel that they really left a whole bunch of character stuff on the floor by doing that. It's a bad choice.
In a moment of heightened emotion, anything can happen between two people, but then it didn't breathe. And it seemed even less true for Jean, who had no aversion to admitting her attraction to Logan, but was always able to draw the line.
Yeah, exactly. Again, one of the big problems is because things had been left since X1. They needed to get the team together. We needed to see their dynamics evolving through conflict and struggle and the different situations that they have to solve and deal with as a unit, and not seeing them having to make decisions together and react to things together means that none of their relationships evolved together whatsoever. We get these slices of cakes that never get put back together. And it's cake. I got a slice. I'm pretty happy with it, but never seeing it all together, which we got multiple times at the end of X1. Seeing them work together as a team at the end of X1 multiple times was just enjoyable. When they take out Sabretooth, when they take out Magneto's device, they're not huge spectacles, but it was the team working together. And that meant a lot to me. And I think it allows the movie to still hold up today.
Did you ever play with action figures as a kid?
Yeah, absolutely. He-Man and Transformers. I know G.I. Joe was your thing.
When I would set up my big G.I. Joe battles, I didn't write character arcs. I wrote moments where the characters would act how I thought they would in a cool way with my other action figures. And then that would be it for those two. And then the next two action figures would have their moments. And at the end of it, everybody'd be dead except the winner of the fight. In a way, that's what this film felt like. There are a whole lot of moments for everybody, like Nightcrawler, like Storm, like Cyclops with his grief for Jean. Great moments. But it's just, oh, this is what this character does, and this is what this character does, and there's no evolution. And it felt very children playing with their action figures as a result. And it's why I genuinely think now, having gone back to them, that X1 is the better of the two movies.
I completely agree for all the reasons that you just said. I think the fact that the X-Men, the team itself, is in pretty much the same place that it was in the first movie. That group didn't get a chance to even acknowledge what Jean meant to them on the team individually. Who was Jean to Storm? And did we get to see what Jean brings to Storm as a team member? Did we get to see what Jean brings to her relationship with Cyclops and how Wolverine is motivated by her effect even on Nightcrawler? When you remove a piece of the puzzle, you need to see the gap that it's left by them. And there's no gap that's left by Jean in that movie. And that's heartbreaking.
One of my favorite Jim Lee issues of the X-Men is the one where they go to the bar and Jean and Storm have a conversation. It's so beautifully rendered and drawn. Oh, I think it's Lobdell at the time is writing the characters having this really introspective moment about their histories and settling differences and acknowledging the relationship between them. And it's one of the things that film cannot give us as superhero fans, the quiet issue, which particularly in the X-Men lore was so important to how you connected with the characters. We get it jammed into seconds of screen time between action set pieces, and it does not land the same. We don't get a month to dwell on a conversation in a bar in the same way we get to dwell on a fight between 47 X-Men and an army of Sentinel. It's one of the things you can't adapt from the medium that we come from and love to this medium that we also love. It works so differently.
It really does. I just think they had the opportunity to really allow Jean to have moments with each and every character that would have then created the heart of the team. And you would have seen, perhaps it's everybody not wanting to be an X-Man, Nightcrawler, not wanting to come with them. And Jean convinces everybody to get back on the bandwagon. And then when she's gone, you're like, are they going to be okay without her? That we lose the heart of the team? Just something, anything. But we lost Jean Grey, and it meant something to us as comic book fans. I don't know if it meant to anybody watching the movie. You're like, oh, that sucks, but...
She was very underwritten.
Yeah.
There was a lot of assumption. You're right about everybody, but I think Jean most of all.
The plot was the priority, making sure they could get to their set pieces, making sure that they could justify the next set piece. That was pretty much what they were slaves to. David Hayter and Singer somehow managed to juggle that in the first X-Men film so much more elegantly that if that film had the same budget of this film, it would have been 3 times the film that X2 is.
It's more a matter of the freedom and time to develop the right story. This film was in production before the first one was released to cinemas, and they had a release date in mind, whereas they waited until they got the right story developed to go with the first one. And God, I know it's hard to leave that money on the table, but you have to think if you delivered an X2 with the story cohesion of X1, it would have built up even more money on the table for X3. And you might have got a better director than Brett Ratner.
So we are going to reconvene with the Wolverine. Very intrigued to see where Logan is during that film. I know it's set in Japan, and so I'm curious to see how they deal with that side to Wolverine's character, because at this stage it feels very shoved in, but we'll see how we go.
That George Lucas quote, have a great first 5 minutes and a great last 20 minutes. Yeah, I don't think we're getting a great last 20 minutes. But other than that, the movie's pretty good.
Awesome. I look forward to it. I get so much more insight into these movies. Like the way you make my brain tick. I really appreciate your time again. I really enjoy these conversations. All right, dude. Thanks so much, man. How do you hang out with your friends? Restaurants, bars, clubs, maybe over at someone's house, just staring at a TV screen, or just sort of hanging out? And if you sit around watching a movie, that's cool, but you're not really talking. I still, hand on my heart, believe that the best way to hang out with your friends is to play a role-playing game. Unlike a board game, role-playing games are not competitive. They are cooperative. You and your friends actually hanging out and creating stories and moments that you'll look back on and laugh at together. But the worst thing about role-playing games is getting started. There's a lot of rules, and being the games master takes a heck of a lot of preparation time each week. Enter GameMastersForHire.com. If you've always wanted to play Dungeons & Dragons, GameMastersForHire.com are experts at teaching you all the rules while taking you on an epic adventure. And if you're loving it, you can play the same character every session, who will then get more and more powerful. If you're a wannabe dungeon or game master, there's no faster way to learn and be great at it than booking a training session with GameMastersForHire.com. For the experienced D&D groups out there, if you're looking for a special birthday gift for your DM, the best gift you can give is to let them be a player for a change by booking a birthday adventure. GameMastersForHire.com will make sure the guest of honor is treated like a hero on their special day. Game Masters for Hire can also run games for anyone, from dinner parties to kids' parties, corporate events, bachelor or bachelorette nights, to ongoing campaigns every week where you play the same character every session. It's like a story that you're building with your friends. GameMastersForHire.com are available online, which is how I play with them. But if you live in the greater Los Angeles area, they can do in-person games with miniatures and sets that'll blow your mind. Please visit GameMastersForHire.com for more information. Reach out to Ollie and his team, and they'll help you out, whatever you need. And just like going out to dinner, split the cost between the lot of you. I'll even kick in. Just use my offer code BADOWER for 10% off your first game. I promise you're going to have an amazing time that you'll always remember. Thank you, GameMastersForHire.com, for sponsoring this video. All right, we go back to Alcohol Lake. Alcohol. Alcohol Lake. We're in Alcohol Lake.
Freudian slip there, my friend.
Would you like to top up your Alcohol Lake? Absolutely. What are you drinking today, Scott? What did we miss? I missed the pour. I'm so sorry.
No, all good. I'm drinking Harry Thiles. What's the Sign of the Times? It's a pun on Harry Styles. Thiles are compounds that you find in malt and hops that produce like the citrusy type flavors in beer. And in the US, they developed a genetically modified strain of yeast that unlocks these compounds and produces amazing flavor notes. But we can't do that in Australia. Genetically modified stuff is just illegal, basically. Not a bad idea to have an advanced island nation without any of this, while we see how it ruins the rest of the world, even though I'm not an anti-genetically modified guy in any way. But the point being, we can't use that yeast here in Australia. So this brewery that I love worked for a year to find a strain of yeast that would release these compounds, these thiols, and produce these amazing flavor notes in the beer. But it's not genetically modified. It's quite the achievement. And what they chose to do with it was make a Harry Styles pun in the name. And that's one of the most Australian things I've ever heard, to be honest.
Things that are going to age poorly. Let's spend a year of work on a pun that is going to age out in a few years. Oh my God.
And just for the record, if they hadn't mentioned Harry Styles in the description of the beer, I would not have known what to Google in order to explain the title to you.
Hello, and thank you so much for making your way through the video. I hope you enjoyed it, ingested it, subsumed it, whatever you managed to do with it. I hope it brought you some value and fun. These are some of my comics. If you want to go check them out, Joker Harley, Criminal Sanity, Volume 1, and I'm currently working on 2. It might be out at the time that you're actually watching this. There is also Artemis by Lindsay Sterling and myself. You can grab that at lindsaysterling.com or at one of her concerts. Feel free to keep checking out all these videos. So proud of everything that Scott and I have created. There are also video essays that I've done by myself, as well as a whole bunch of video game stuff. Look, have some fun, enjoy. We'll see you in the next video.